Welcome back to the GPO and to our special programme on 1916. Maura Fitzpatrick, I'm conscious we're sitting here in the GPO and your grandfather was a member, isn't this correct, of the Dublin Metropolitan Police?
Yes.
And he was the only policeman in here
on duty at the time.
When the rebels came in.
When the rebels. And he was captured and tied up on the chair and left there for 3 days. The O'Reilly spoke to my grandfather and he said, I'm not going to shoot you. I'll let you out the side door. Unfortunately, he got out and went through where the Monument Creamery used to be years ago. He was shot twice there. And then he was taken to hospital, but he was pensioned off then, and that was in 16, and he died October 19, and my grandmother at the time was given £60 pension for the year, but the minute he died, the money died. And she'd 4 children.
But do you think your grandfather was properly remembered, Maura?
No, nobody remembers, only his family. Only his family. Nobody ever remembered Edward Dony was the only policeman in the GPO when it was raided in 1916 and died from his wounds. No one, only the immediate family that suffered.
Beside me here, Colum Gallagher. Tell me about Peter Paul Gallagher, your father.
Yeah, my father.
And his role in 1916.
Yeah, well, he became a member of the 2nd Dublin Battalion. MacDonagh was the commandant of that, and from there he became a lieutenant, and then he became a captain, and he took part in the gun running at Hout. He was one of the officers in that. And then from then 1915, MacDonagh put him on the training staff, which was probably of the IRB, basically, and he was promoted to a commandant. And in Easter weekend, on Monday, he heard the ructions here in the GPO, and he immediately got across here to the GPO, and being the sort of talents that he had probably in training, he helped in the defence here for some extent. And then Connolly and Pearce called him aside in this very building, it's amazing, in this very building 100 years ago, and said, now, okay, Gallagher, you've got to go back to Enniscorthy. He immobilised the Wexford Battalion. Of all people here, my father didn't die in the Rising. He was sentenced as a criminal to Dartmoor for solitary confinement for 9 months, or I think it was 10 months, on appalling conditions. But he went on, he came out of, just the whole story, he came out of these prisons. My father went right up onto the Dáil. He signed on the treaty side because the constituency wanted him to do that. He never wanted to be a hero. He did his duty for Ireland. He fought for freedom, and that's what he did.
Eddie Brennan, tell me about your family and your story.
The younger of the two was 18-and-a-half-year-old Francis. I believe his reason for joining the Royal Dublin Fusiliers was because they had this system in Dublin at the time called the PALs. I'm not sure whether he was influenced by his older brother, who had been killed the previous year in Flanders, 21-year-old Eugene of the Royal Irish Rifles. And my father was in at the same time. But anyway, Francis...
So all in the British Army, basically, Eddie?
Yeah, all 3 of them, yes, yeah. On Easter Monday, word came through at about 12:30 from the headquarters in Parkgate Street that the castle was under attack. So they were ordered to get their men, battalion, the 10th battalion, over to the castle to relieve the castle, which was under attack from Sean Connolly and those people on the roof of the City Hall. So they formed up, marched out the gate onto Benburb Street, onto the quays, turned left, and they had only gone about 200 yards before they reached Queen Street Bridge. They were fired upon from across the river from the Mendicity Institute. Francis was mortally wounded within the first few minutes, and he died the next day in the Adelaide Hospital.
Your uncle's, Francis, who was shot dead at Usher's Island, he's not regarded as a hero.
Well, I won't even suggest that he's a hero to me, because the 1916 men were heroes to me because I was schooled on it. I had a teacher who was old IRA, and he told us constantly stories of the rising, the men involved in it. To me, they were heroes. But it wasn't.
So what do you think of your Uncle Francis then? You don't think he was a hero?
Not really, no, because he was doing what he thought was the right thing, as were the men in the Mendicity Institute. They were doing according to their aspirations and beliefs. And for whatever reason Francis joined up, he was doing it because he felt it was the right thing to do. So obviously he wasn't from a nationalist family when three of the family were involved in the British Army.
Eleanor Cummins, I think it's your grandaunt, isn't it? Was a nurse involved in 1916. Tell us about her.
Her name was Nurse Margaret Keogh, and she worked in the Dublin Union, the South Dublin Union. And on Easter Monday, she went to tend to a wounded volunteer. Dan McCarthy was his name, and she was shot dead. He was wounded, she was shot dead. He was already wounded. And in his witness report, he said that the soldiers who shot her, he said they must have lost their heads because they shot a nurse in full uniform. And she was in her late 40s, she wasn't married, she lived around the corner, and she was quite, well-to-do, a career woman of the time. Yes.
And yet I suppose you could think, Eleanor, if the rising hadn't happened, she wouldn't have lost her life, she wouldn't have been shot dead.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And it's a tragedy, And in the 60s, she was commemorated, and there was a plaque put up. My father was there, and and now we're commemorating her on Saturday. There's going to be a new plaque unveiled, and in another month's time, there'll be a play that I've written about her on in Carlow. So my family is making sure that we commemorate her. And also she's being remembered in other ways, because at the time she was a footnote in history. And one of the accounts said that she passed away from fainting, kind of a euphemism, because it was a scandal. How do you deal with that a nurse was shot? And so my family believes she was probably quite a strong-willed character who would have, went against, well, you mustn't go out there. And she was, I'll go out and I'll help someone,
Alex Finlater, you're my last person to speak to here. I think it's your grandfather was Captain Henry de Courcy Wheeler, and he took the surrenders from the 1916 commanders, is that right?
He took the surrenders, so he was present, he witnessed them, he took them first with Pearce, and then when he got a message from General Lowe wanted an officer, wanted to have a staff officer to help him with the surrenders. So grandfather got into his little Model T Ford at about midnight and set off up alone through the dark roads and arrived in, I think, Parkgate Street, reported to General Lowe. And the next morning the message came through from Nurse O'Farrell that they were wanted. So General Lowe said, "Come on, Wheeler, jump into the car." Off they went. And then that iconic picture, he was there, and as Pearce surrendered, handed over his sword and then his pistol, which was handed to grandfather, and the other things out of Pearce's pockets handed over. And my feeling is that grandfather actually took that picture because he's the only one not in it.
What was your family, and I know your
Yeah.
106-year-old mother is watching this,
Yes.
but what was your family's attitude to the rising?
I think you want to go to the Findlater side, and we had I don't know 14, 15 grocery stores around the place. But take grandfather, seeing all the other buildings being damaged, he would have been very upset. Then early in the program they talked about Fred Dietrichen. He was married into the family, and he was the one who came across the first officer to be shot. So how would he be feeling? He had two brothers, he had three brothers away in the First War, one killed in Gallipoli, one killed in the Somme. When they set off in 1914, absolutely happy that we were getting home rule. And they were Redmondites, and they were following, they saw that we should get home rule through the parliamentary way.
What do you think all about, Moore's relation here as well, I suppose police officers who were killed during the rising, but they're not regarded. History looks on them as though they fell on the wrong side of history. They're not regarded as heroes in the way that your grandfather is.
I think it's unfortunate, because we should be commemorating everybody. But certainly we are celebrating some people. But what we're celebrating really is getting our independence. I mean, for instance, we're talking about Eamon Count and other leaders. The 1918 election endorsed what they did.
Ken, in your case, it's a similar story to Moore in a way. As we said earlier, there's no plaque in this country remembering your relation, and yet Cork Station is called Ken Station.
Well, I knew it was Ken Station for a long time before I knew who it was named after. I wouldn't see my great-grandfather as a hero of 1916. I'd see him as a casualty of 1916, the same way as there were so many civilian casualties. And I think it is a shame that those people aren't remembered. For example, we heard earlier about the Battle of Ashburn, County Meath, where there's a memorial to the 2 volunteers who died, but there were 13 people died there. There were 8 police, 3 civilians who were forgotten, essentially.
Miriam, I think we have to get away from seeing heroes, and if you take the opposite of villains, I think we have to recognise, and I think one of the best things to come out of the commemoration, the centenary commemoration, is an acknowledgement that it was a very complex issue, that there were people who were all out there doing what they believed, in most cases, to be the best thing. And the best thing is a very subjective thing.
Thank you all very much for coming in here to the GPO tonight. Thanks also to all David's guests who joined us earlier. We'd also like to thank Morris and Jane O'Keefe of the 1916 Rising Oral History Collection for their immense help in researching this programme tonight. Primetime is back in our studio in Donnybrook on Thursday, so please do join us then. But before we go, I'd like to thank everyone in the GPO here who's been so kind to us tonight. Ihawa.